Okay, shall we start? Konnichiwa, welcome. Good afternoon to all. Magandang hapon. I'm Professor Jocelyn Osolero, Associate Professor at the Asian Center. We welcome all of our guests, distinguished guests, scholars, faculty, staff, our dear students, and avid attendees and participants of the organized webinars of the Asian Center, University of the Philippines, Diliman. Welcome to this virtual book launch event to launch the book, The Politics of International Marriage in Japan. And it's my honor to welcome everyone to this event. The phenomenon of international marriages has figured prominently, not just in area studies research, but more fascinatingly, as one of the key themes of events organized by the Asian Center and by yours truly. In fact, back in 2019, I organized a lecture forum featuring Dr. Asuncion Fresnosa-Flo, a distinguished alumna of the college and author of the book, International Marriages and Marital Citizenship, Southeast Asian Women on the Move. In her talk, she discussed the trends and issues arising from the international marriages of Southeast Asian women. And she also talked about how the phenomenon has sparked conceptual debates about how to properly describe the phenomenon, whether to use the term cross-border, intermarriage, interracial, or interethnic, and so on and so forth. She concluded by highlighting the importance of the intimate and the social legal dimensions of couple or family life, the nexus between women, the notion of ideal family and nation. And the context, in the context of the nation state, be it the origin or the host nation state, it matters that we understand how international marriages occur and are accommodated. So this is the objective of today's book launching event. So dear guests and attendees, to formally welcome all of us, I'd like to call on the Dean of the Asian Center, Dr. Henelito A. Sevilla Jr. Dean?
Thank you very much, Professor Celero. And I apologize for coming in late. I was in another engagement. Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, we are privileged to organize a book launch of Dr. Viktoriya Kim, Ms. Nelia Balgua, and Ms. Beverly Ann Yamamoto. As it is stated on the book publicity, and which is also found at the UP Asian Center website, the book titled The Politics of International Marriage in Japan, or Marriages in Japan, explores the political and institutional climate surrounding international marriages in that country. Specifically, it analyzes the definition of international and cross-border marriages, as well as issues and challenges being faced by bicultural and bilingual couples, including, of course, the second generation or their children. I believe this book is not just timely, but also an important contribution to migration studies, and indeed for the Asian Center studies. Specifically, especially so that international travel, telecommunication technology, and globalization are making our globe smaller and everyone closer to one another. This book reminded me when I was still in Iran and when I served as president of the Filipino-Irano community. A community comprises of mostly Iranian husbands and Filipino wives, but also of Filipinos married to other nationalities. As I reflected this book to my personal experiences in handling the bicultural and bilingual community, I could say that there is so much beauty and diversity through intercultural marriages, as it offers opportunity for someone to create a space where racial, cultural, and political elements transcend beyond one's guarded boundary into something open, diverse, tolerant, and inclusive space for everyone to live in. There is no doubt that bicultural families help promote cultural acceptance, understanding, and dialogue. A study by Jennifer Latson prescribed that interracial marriages help in the reduction of prejudices and discrimination in one given community, while children of the interracial and biracial marriages are also prescribed to be as more attractive than their monoracial peers, such as in the book of Laws, which titled Why Are Mixed Race People Perceived as More Attractive and published in 2009, he categorically mentioned and quoted some authors also that people of mixed Asian and European nationalities are found to be more attractive than either Asian and European alone. My question here is that, do you believe so? Or do you agree with this? Now, however, interracial couples and their children also face a lot of political, cultural, and economic, as well as legal challenges in some countries. These challenges and discrimination can be manifested either from exercising rights to vote and participate in local and national election in a given democratically country, denial from the government employment opportunity, and they also face issue on citizenship and even discrimination in schools, among others. Now, this afternoon, book launch will give us more information about the politics of international marriages, specifically in Japan. With this, I would like to extend my congratulations to the authors of this book, Dr. Viktoriya Kim, Ms. Nelia Balgua, and Ms. Anne Yamamoto, for their launch here at the UP Asian Center. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank our colleague, Professor Jean Encenas Franco, and the Department of Political Science, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy of UP Diliman for accepting our invitation to be our discussant today. With this, I would like to say mabuhay and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Dean Sevilla, for the very warm opening remarks. And indeed, the phenomenon of international marriage has to be examined and understood, for its complexity, its impacts, both in the receiving and origin countries. Us Filipinos have been one of the Philippines has been one of the major sources of spouses, to foreign nationals globally, and it's just interesting to really engage in discussions on relevant issues, related to the impacts of social impacts of such migration trend, or that particular type of migration, which is marriage migration. But yeah, I think the next goal of this program is also to provide an overview of the book. Before I give the floor to our speaker, one of the authors of the book, I'd like to give an overview of the book, The Politics of International Marriage in Japan. So basically, the book explores the political and institutional climate surrounding international marriages in Japan. It also analyzes various ways in which researchers introduce international couples using a camera lens perspective. And more importantly, there are first-hand experiences of foreign, such as Russian-speaking and Filipino women and Western men and women, and Japanese spouses and their mixed heritage children that are vividly presented in the book. One of the reasons I'm also very interested in this book project is because I'm also doing research on mixed heritage children, specifically Japanese Filipino children in my research. So the book consists of 9 chapters, which analyze the definition of international and cross-border marriages, the academic and historical background of international marriages, perspectives on why Japanese and foreign nationals choose each other, and how they express their love. Later, the latter chapters of the book introduce different areas of married life, the life choices and negotiation processes surrounding these, and the issue of raising bicultural or bilingual children, and the ways spouses deal with family conflicts and even divorce. This afternoon, we are very privileged to have with us one of the authors of the book, Dr. Viktoriya Kim, who is a specially appointed associate professor at the School of Human Sciences, Osaka University in Japan. She specializes in international marriage migration, multicultural policies, and integration issues of migrants in Japan. Her current projects involve comparative research on Russian-speaking female marriage migrants in South Korea and Japan, as well as foreign residents and multicultural community building practices in Japan during COVID-19 pandemic. And also, she's doing research on the integration of third-generation Koreans in Central Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Viktoriya Kim.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Celero, and thank you, Professor Sevilla. So shall I start with my book presentation? Well, first of all, these are my contents. I'll talk about international marriage trends in Japan, and then I'll discuss how we organized the book around this idea of international marriage as public and private affair. And also I'll reflect a bit on the foreign spouses in Japan and discuss how I see the future of marriage migration studies. So first thing, why we called it the politics of international marriage. The politics is about the web of different influences that affect actually international marriage couples. And we tend to look at them and discuss the experiences from cultural perspective, but there are more layers to that. And my first goal was to introduce historical background of international marriages and how they, not sending countries historical perspective, but and social perspective, but Japan's historical perspective and its attitude toward international marriages. So you can find some historical understanding and governmental understanding on international marriages, and then cultural influences. So all these points were connected, and that's why we called it the politics of marriage. And again, my main research is, as you can understand, I'm a Russian-speaking person. I'm from Kazakhstan, and my main research participants were women from former Soviet Union who came to Japan in 1990s and 2000s. And the biggest group in the book that was discussed is Russian-speaking women. And also, but just their background is not sufficient enough to contextualize. So that's why other two groups were added, like Asian groups was represented by Filipino women, and then we had Western couples. And I'll explain it in a bit what were the limitations of this. And well, main theoretical perspectives that were used in the book were gender geographies of power. We saw how women use their gender, or men use their gender like in different ways, like by changing location, social location and geographic location, and of course agency and structure dichotomy. And we also used the idea of uti and soto, inward looking and outward looking, to explain cultural contexts of Japanese society and how foreign spouses see this. So this is the overview of the book. And as you already, as Dr. Solero already introduced, there are 9 chapters. I will not stop on each chapter, on introducing each chapter. I will go to the main ideas that I want to deliver today. So first of all, what are how many international marriages are there in Japan? And here you can see on the top, like in this graph, you can see on the top the overall marriage number in Japan, and as you can see, it was like from the statistics on international marriage in Japan was calculated from 1960s, and compared to marriages, endogamous Japanese marriages, like international marriages, are very small in numbers. And the largest number of these marriages were in 2005, 2006, when they reached 44,000. But later they started, they declined, and there was particular background to such decline, and that was related to entertainment industry in Japan. And but again, after a huge drop, these days we see again the number of these marriages growing, and I assume they will be very different from what they were like 15 or 20 years ago. And these are the numbers of divorces, and I will not stop here. Particularly, I'll show this graph that shows the number of international marriages compared to the number of divorces. So the blue columns, they introduce the overall number of marriages in that year, and the black line across is introducing the overall number of divorces, international divorces in that particular year. And we have information from 1992. So here it shows as if it was in 1995. But as you can see, the number of divorces is really great. And again, it was our interest why international marriages, international married couples divorce more often than endogamous couples. So why I discussed why I discuss international marriages as public and private affair. We tend to look at the marriage as something that is happening between two people, right? Well, in Japan at least. And it's their decisions, it's like their feelings that are involved. But actually, in reality, there are multiple ways of looking into it. And what I started doing is tracing how academic views on international marriages changed. And first thing, and it was introduced in 2000s, in the beginning of 2000s, when the idea of hypergamy, and hypergamy is when like the idea that women from poorer countries getting like global hypergamy, getting married to men from richer countries, and the economic reasons drive global marriage migration. And when researchers actually stopped and looked at it, and they said, well, actually, it's not the poorest women who get married, and it doesn't, and getting married to a man from developed country, from economically developed country, does not necessarily mean that their position in the receiving society will be high, so they might move to structurally to lower positions. So and that was one of the way of looking at international marriages. And then another reason for for growing number of international marriages overall in general was the gender relations in the sending countries. And there are many studies that introduce women's, like Philippine women's or like Russian women's environment in their home countries, and why they choose foreign men to get married. Of course, we see, as Professor Sivilia mentioned as well, there are racial and ethnic ideas behind these marriages, why these couples choose each other. And like in Japan, one of the common ideas is that mixed race children are cuter than like same race children. And also another way of looking at international marriages was about marital citizenship, formal citizenship versus marital citizenship, and how these are different. So while I think that all these ideas are very important, what I was trying to look at is how they are affecting marriages on different stages in their lives. So that's why I utilize this camera lens perspective, and I'm using this idea of different snapshots and different situations where couples find themselves, and how they, what sort of influences brought them to particular situations. That's why they're not, in this way, they do not become static. They are they're moving, and we show the whole story of the family, and how it was developing, and what sort of influences were there. And of course, because it was about also the public influence, we wanted to see what was, how international marriages were seen by Japanese government. And it was interesting, there was mentioning of mixed heritage children and these couples from Tokugawa period and a bit earlier, so from 1600s, and how when the country was closed, those couples, the foreign spouses of Japanese women and their children were expelled from Japan. And then the situation was changing through Meiji period, where these couples again started being more accepted, and there were even more liberal movement towards making Japanese men getting married to Western women. And the idea was again it was eugenic notions that were driving support of such marriages. And later we see war brides, where there were more Japanese women getting married to foreign men, and especially soldiers, American soldiers. And later it became rural brides, and usually rural brides were to substitute lack of brides in Japanese rural areas by bringing women from Asia. And later it changed into mail order brides. Well, we call them mail order brides, but so it first it was marriage introduction agencies, then they became online dating sites, and so these were also influences. And later it was entertainers. So there is it's not that one of the trend finished and another trend started. Let's say rural brides and mail order brides, they were happening simultaneously, but with different influences. And again, looking at the immigration policies was very important. First of all, it was whether it is really about economic situation, whether it is about structural factors that makes women to get married. And we did not really look into the idea whether it was a genuine love marriage or whether it was not. We just looked into, okay, so how do immigration officials see the idea of love, and how people express it. And so one of the interesting ideas was that It was romantic love versus prosaic love. And so this idea was discussed and how people express their love to each other. And again, we looked into the women's integration because women are usually as marital citizens, they are dependent on their husbands for integration, for cultural integration, and for all areas of life. And my interest was into looking how this happens, what sort of issues they face. And finally, we went through this whole process of how government looked at it and how people looked at it. And finally, again, it was international divorce. While when it comes to marriage, there is a lot of influence. There is visa issues. There is like this whole idea of whether these people like each other or love each other, or whether the marriage is for visa. But when it comes to divorce, there is no really regulations except like Hague Convention on child abduction. But again, my interest was, okay, so when divorce happens, how it works. So, and this whole section on international divorce and the position of the state versus the position of people who are in these marriages. And well, in our case studies, there were, as I already mentioned, Russian-speaking women, and mostly they represent 6 countries of former Soviet Union: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. So, and overall, there is no exact number of marriage migrants from these countries, and especially from these former Soviet Union countries. And so I had to do a bit of calculations. I will not really explain, it's written there. So, but overall there was, I estimate that there was 3,500, 4,000 female marriage migrants. And from Philippines, I estimate there was 100,000 female marriage migrants. And well, at this point, and they might have already very different status, probably permanent citizens or permanent resident status. Sorry, and or spouse of Japanese national visa holders. So that's why, like, it's a bit complicated to calculate this, but in general, and the issue behind this is because spouses of Japanese national visa, you can hold it. Before, it was after 5 years of holding this visa, you could receive permanent residence. These days, it's after 3 years of marriage. So that's why I listed number of permanent residents and spouses. So as you can see, the number is growing, and like, we have to talk more about the issues. Overall, in our case, we had 85 85 couples, 85 participants. 48 of those were from foreign participants. 48 were from former Soviet Union, above mentioned countries, and 23 from the Philippines, and 24 from Western, so-called Western countries, because they did not represent one country. There were North Americans, Europeans, and Australians there. So we call them like Western spouses. And yes, one of the idea of who marries whom, and it's not like what sort of people get married with each other, but how they meet. Like, we were trying to trace whether the place where they met and how they met affected their life in Japan. And so we broadly spread these couples, split these couples into 2 groups of those who met inside Japan and those who met outside. And then again, those who met outside, whether they were willing to live in Japan, whether they chose Japan intentionally, or whether it were circumstances that brought them to Japan, but they are willing, they have multiple they had multiple kind of choices. And also we looked at the couples that met inside Japan and whether they and how they decided to stay in Japan, or whether they're looking to move out. And one of the interesting patterns was that even couples that met outside of Japan, usually it was males, husbands, professional priorities that drove these couples to live in Japan and to settle in Japan. And for the couples that met inside Japan, there was no even question in many cases, especially in cases of Russian-speaking women and Filipino women, whether they want to stay or whether they want to leave. But in couples where there was Japanese wife, foreign husband, there were also discussions that many Japanese wives or their husbands wanted to live overseas, but they didn't have opportunity to do this. So, and again, it's not about, okay, so how they got married and all these complications around these marriages, but then how do households get arranged? And again, it was not about the economic disparities that would define how the couple will organize their household. It was mostly, and in many cases, it was supported that it was based on women's culture and tradition. And if women could not, especially in case of Filipino women, when they had troubles to to organize household traditions based on their customs, they were finding new ways of doing this by involving religion. So religion became kind of third space for them, where they were actually experiencing and exercising their agency and bringing this religious bit into the family. And another question was, okay, so how do these couples raise bilingual and bicultural children? And we had only cases from Russian-speaking women and Western couples, and it was very good kind of comparison, because many Russian women, while they valued former old type Soviet education, they did not plan, they did not think that current Russian education will be important for their children. So they mostly chose Japanese schools, Japanese public education. And this led to many children becoming more monolingual rather than bilingual. And also those couples, especially Western couples that tried to raise bicultural children, it was, first of all, it was a lot of efforts. And second, it was always one bit of culture missing, either Japanese or foreign parents' culture. And well, I do not really have much time, but I will quickly touch upon divorce issues. And one of the divorce divorce issues that was kind of harsh was about custody and visa of the spouses. And I introduced two cases of Russian women's divorce. And we talked about divorce in general, how it is organized in Japan, what sort of obstacles or opportunities foreign spouses have. And probably you, maybe you have seen that today there was news on this French citizen whose children were abducted by his Japanese wife. It was a bit like reverse situation where Russian women had to find ways on how to get custody over their children, and how they had how they failed or how they succeeded in it. So these are the issues discussed in the book. And yeah, I'm sorry, I have to skip this bit. Oh, yeah, no, not this bit. So future of marriage migration studies. After looking at this, now I guess with the end of the entertainment visa and with the end of the large number of kind of like of hostesses from former Soviet Union countries or from Philippines coming to Japan. So what is next? And we see that there is growing diversity among foreign partners. Those are like international students, also male migrants, and including English teachers, like Western or Asian English teachers. And there are more dating apps, and there is tourism that was developed till 2019. And so how this will change international marriages will be very interesting. Another issue is that, well, I looked at Russian-speaking women who were born in 1970s, 1980s, that was like post-Soviet countries. And those who are getting married now were already raised in a bit different culture. So how their culture will be different from those who came here like in the beginning of 2000s or in 1990s. So this will be another turn. And of course, one of the important questions is how these marriage migrants will integrate in Japan, and what are the issues behind the integration, why it is difficult for them to become like citizens and like to receive citizenship in Japan, and future paths of mixed heritage children, because many of these children already are young adults, and they're making their steps into Japanese society and how their life works out. And yes, so like these days, this is a hot topic, custody and clear-break divorces in Japan, whether it will change or not. So these are the tasks for future of migration, marriage migration studies. And I'll finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim, for the very comprehensive presentation on your book. And I myself am very excited, look forward to reading it. Hopefully get like a physical copy of the book soon, especially that I was just recently invited to review it, like I told you. And yeah, I couldn't wait but to really enjoy, going through the pages. And actually, it was a bit nostalgic because anyway, in the audience is my MA advisor, Professor James Farrer, who's also a specialist on international marriages. It was through him that I was exposed to this topic. And in fact, 13 years ago, it's just incidentally 13 years ago, before I joined Sophia University, my research proposal was about international marriages of Filipino migrants in Japan. And I don't know if my Professor Perry remembers this, but what I was really coming from at that time, when I was really intrigued about the international, the trend, the phenomenon was what would be the maybe recipe for success. Like I was more optimistic at approaching the study, especially that I think the phenomenon has been has gained bad reputation. I think it's one of the sources of stigma, no, for Filipino migrants in Japan. And I was very much intrigued in knowing and understanding what will make these marriages work. No, what were the factors that would contribute to its success, no, and maybe somewhat providing a balance, a to counterbalance, no, these more dominant, these forces and discussions on Japanese Filipino marriages, yeah, in the context of Japan. And I was interested very much in looking at in comparing urban and rural contexts, because I think it's also different, the characteristics of rural marriages, and also the migration channel. I think of Filipinos venturing in marriage migration to the rural areas, to the countryside. I think it's very much different. And what I learned while I was doing this research was, because my research was about Japanese Filipino families, was how it's very prominent that a lot of Filipino migrants who intermarried, who married the Japanese in the urban areas, in the cities, were former entertainers. Unlike those in the rural villages, they were able to um, uh, how do you call this, migrate to the rural areas via marriage agency introduction and the local government to local government partnerships, because back in the 1970s this was one of the channels through which Filipinos would be learn about the possibility of marrying a Japanese, through the local government, specifically in the northern part of the Philippines. And there was a time when the governor of this province called Isabela had a partnership with Yamagata, one of the prefectures, in Yamagata, one of the towns or cities in Yamagata prefecture. So there's already an existing research on this. Some of my more senior, seasoned Filipino scholars from the University of the Philippines have worked on this, the likes of Dr. Samonte, Dr. Leslie Bauzon, among others. So I was just very particularly nostalgic about the topic. So had I not changed, maybe I didn't go too far, from international marriage, because I was doing mixed heritage children and also the Filipino migrant women. And looking at your recommendations for future research, okay, I'd like to claim that in 2 to 3 years time, so hopefully my book my book on Japanese Filipino children and their pathways, transnational migration pathways and life trajectories would come out. Hopefully, I need a ton of energy to be able to realize that endeavor. For now, I'd like to congratulate you for this book, as well as your co-authors, for this project, this endeavor. I know it's no easy feat to come up with a volume, that's very, very useful, and I look forward also to recommending this book to some of my students who are very much interested in understanding international marriages as a phenomenon. So on to the discussion points of our discussant, who unfortunately cannot be physically with us, but she did prepare her recording as a response or as a sort of a comments on the introductory portion of the book. So the recording is prepared by Dr. Jean Encinas Franco, who's also an expert on the politics of gender. She's an associate professor at the Department of Political Science from the College of Social Science and Philosophy, UP Diliman. And I think our staff is ready to play it so that we can also take note of her insights on the book. Shall we play it, Janus?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean Encinas Franco, and I'm from the Department of Political Science of UP. I am equally honored and happy to respond to Dr. Kim, Dr. Nelia Balgo, and Dr. Beverly Yamamoto's account of marriage migration. Indeed, while international migration has been phenomenal in these ages, more than 200 million migrants live and work outside of their countries of birth today, there is relatively little focus on marriage migration. Much of the media and policy attention is on labor migration and refugees. Understandably, because these are overtly political issues whose impact on sending and host states are easily concretized. Marriage migration, on the other hand, is seen as something that is personal and private and is generally perceived as unproblematic, if I may say so. The small percentage of marriage migrants compared to overall migrants is also partly the reason why there is little attention to it compared to other forms of migration. However, marriage migration is inherently political, as the book argues, especially if we go by the feminist argument that the personal is political. While marriage migrants are but a small fraction of migrants, their impact on host societies can be argued to be far greater than others, precisely because they are part of what has been termed as global householding and the creation of global families. This is the reason why South Korea, for example, has launched multiculturalism as an important government program to balance the need to increase its birth rate and the public discourse surrounding marriage migrants. For these reasons, the book breaks new grounds in the study of marriage migration in many ways. While marriage migration has been studied using Mahler and Pesser's gender geographies of power and the tension between agency and structure, the book's unique contribution is in helping us look at marriage migration using the Japanese cultural context of uchi and soto. This is important because the prevailing literature, for example, in studies of marriage migration to East Asia, seems to focus on a more generic appreciation of marriage migration from a pan-East Asian perspective, which fails to nuance the intricacies and cultural specificities of each East Asian receiving state. The usual analysis, likewise, of state policies and response offers little account of how cultural nuances affect policies and perceptions of marriage migrants. Such is also the case in looking at the impact on women who are seen as having, as the book argues, uniform experiences. Thus, in incorporating Uchi and Soto, the book provides us with how foreign spouses and their Japanese spouses navigate their familial, societal, and state relationships in Japan. The book's other vital contribution is in having a different data sets of marriage migrant families from Western and those from the former Soviet Union, and data sets of marriage migrant families from the Philippines. Such qualitative comparisons allow us to deeply understand the lived experiences of marriage migrants rather than account for them in the often caricatured version expressed in media discourses. I particularly note the effort of the authors to veer away from women's uniform experiences, as they say, no? And submissive accounts, since much of policy discourse has actually been informed by this notion, devoid of any understanding of women's own perspectives of agency. Overall, the book is an important milestone in the expansion of knowledge about marriage migration. I congratulate the authors and laud them in their efforts in coming up with a publication that will surely be talked about in the years to come. Thank you and have a good day.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Franco, for the insights, no, on the book. Would you like to react, Dr. Kim?
Yes, thank you very much. And I thought that it was important to bring different ethnicities, because so far most of the studies on international marriage migration are focusing either on one ethnicity, or basically if they're trying to cover different areas of lives, there is no one representation, like one explanation. Okay, so how did it happen in Japan, in which ways? And yes, we were talking a lot about this idea of uchi and soto, and whether we are essentializing Japanese culture. And but in the end, we decided to go with it because it was important to show that it is Japan, and Japanese people are participating in these marriages, and they affect like how couples actually act with each other, and like what sort of issues are caused. And one of the interesting things was that many couples didn't see themselves as representatives of different cultures and different states. Whenever I was asking them, oh, why did you get married? And they were like, well, I liked this person, and oh, I loved this person. And there is no difference, like he's a human or she's a human.
Right.
And she does not represent Russian to me. She represents a woman to me. And that was, I guess, one of the issues behind um, the problems these marriages face, because there is a low acknowledgement of these cultural differences. And I've heard from many Russian speaking women in particular, who were saying, well, you know, men are the same in their essence, and but they didn't see this cultural context, and I think it's very hard for them to see it, so, and that causes a lot of problems.
Right. I'm particularly interested in because we understand though that the volume really gathered your energies yeah, together with the other two co-authors, no, but I'm more interested in how you prepared, no, for this volume. I guess for others who might be interested to also ventured in this type of research and also maybe come up with a publishable, volume like this. Maybe you would want us to, inform our audience, know how did you prepare and what were the processes involved in coming up with the book before we get to the, nitty gritty of the, the very complex issues behind, the international marriage phenomenon. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit? Because anyway, this is a book launch, so we understand also how the book was born, right?
Mhm. Okay, so well, I came to Japan as an international student, as mixed student, and I was looking for topics. And one day I just thought, well, international marriages. And the thing why it attracted me was that it got very popularized in 2000s, and it was the image, and there was even a song in 1990s. That was written by Russians about how getting married to an American guy is really the dream. And now when I read Russian papers on international marriages, everybody mentions this song because it was very popular. And so starting from that, I was like, okay, so how is it happening in Japan? And the media representations of these marriages were very kind of like sad, and how women are oppressed and they're victims of violence and of these foreign husbands. And when I started looking into like finding marriage migrants here in Japan, Russian marriage migrants, and when I met them, it was very interesting. My image of them of being like sad and kind of constrained in their life circumstances, and these women were very normal. They were leading kind of normal life. They were going through hardships, and so, and it was like there was a lot of kind of mismatch in representation of these women, and how I saw them. And so like that was where like all this project was born. And I wrote my PhD thesis on marriage migrants from former Soviet Union. And like I discussed a lot of all the issues they face in marriages. But as when it came to the book, I by that time, of course, I read a lot about Filipino women in Japan and about Russian women in the US, and like a lot of different fake marriages in Korea, and like a lot of different types of marriages. And then I thought, well, how can I contribute to this? And that's where like the idea of bringing different ethnicities came to my attention. And luckily, there were two more data sets that were collected by Balgoa and by Yamamoto. And it's on one hand, it was very lucky occasion, and on the other hand, it was not too lucky, because lucky that they had data sets of the people who lived in the same time, and they were collecting their data at the same time as I was collecting my data. Not lucky because they are from different fields. That's why there is a bit of balance issues, because I was looking into all like areas of women's lives. I was, and many of those women, they had very small children when I started. So I didn't really look into the educational strategies. Again, because Yamamoto is specializing in education, her data were mostly related to education, but also to the details of the couples. And Balgo is anthropologist again, so her data set was a bit different. So I had to kind of put them together in a balanced way, so there is not too much of Russian women talking there, but all different couples. And we did not really do like big comparison. We made a lot of comparisons on who they are, how they get married. But then when it came to the family affairs, and especially how they were organizing their households, there were a lot of there was a lot of organizational issues, because how do we put them together? How do we sort them? So yes, I had to deal with all these problems. And then I would write my Japanese, my Russian women's side, and I had Yamamoto's data, so I could see how they're different. And then Balgo was looking into it and just adding her Filipino data. And so that's how it was working out.
Could you tell us about the timeline, no, of how you were able to complete the entire process, the entire journey of giving birth to a book?
Okay, so I think I started writing, I didn't have those 2 chapters on divorces, and because divorces came later, and I had to look through the whole, one of the case that I introduced there. I met that woman in the middle of her divorce, actually. And then a bit later when we met, she got back with her husband, and then she got divorced, and then she remarried. And so like by 2017, I already had bigger picture. Also, there was another woman who was in the who was in the process of her divorce, and then her husband took away her child. And then I was looking into how they were like dealing with that issue. And yes, eventually like it became the very latest chapter. And so in 2017, I was writing this like 2 chapters that were not there, like historical chapter on I read some secondary sources in Japanese language. So, and I brought them and organized this historical overview of international marriages in Japan, and that chapter on divorces. But the whole process started in 2019. And yes, I think we no, 2018 till 2019. In 2019, the first draft of the book in December was submitted, and then there was review, and then we worked again on reworking, and then it was accepted last year in November. So, and then it took 1 year for publication and copy editing and everything. So, and it will be there was a question in the chat, I think, about how to get this book, and it will be available for to buy in December, on the 10th of December. Jocelyn,
Where can they buy it? Is there an official website? By the way, the book is published by Rutgers University Press, and yes, it's gonna be available for purchase via Amazon or the University Press website.
There is friends and family discount. I'll try to find it while we are having discussion, and I'll post it in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, but you should, if you use friends and family discount, you will need to use Rutgers website to buy the book.
All right, all right. So thank you very much, Dr. Kim, for sharing that information. Very precious piece of information for some of our attendees who might be interested in buying the book, to have their own copy. I was just wondering, because like I said a while ago, no, I mentioned that I was also particularly interested in this topic for a research project. And yeah, the reason for shifting my focus on bicultural parenting, that was the focus of my MA thesis at Sophia, was because when I was doing field work in Tokyo, I was surprised that a lot of the Filipino women I met in the field, in the church or ethnic store, or even in the migrant support organizations, mostly are single mothers. It was a challenge for me to find once in a while, every once in a while, I get to meet a woman who is quote unquote happily married, is still happily married. And while I was doing my field work, yeah, in Tokyo, it was like um, I get hooked on this story, of how this woman, no, I would follow the lives of my respondents, those Filipino migrant mothers. Like, in the process of interviewing them, I would have to just encourage them, not really pressure them, but it really depends on their emotional, status at times. Like, some are very generous at sharing, how they met their spouse, how a marriage went for them, and what were the reasons why they had to divorce. And some of them, I don't know if you've encountered this with your respondents, where some of them got divorced without their knowledge. Like, this clear break, so-called clear break type of divorce, where there's some sort of, mutual agreement to end the marriage. Because a lot of the migrant women have encountered in the field, at least in Tokyo, experience divorce without adequate knowledge about how the procedure works, because for one, there's no divorce in the Philippines, and it's a contributing factor to their maybe difficulty coming to terms with the divorce process, is that, because of their devotion to the church, a lot of them are Catholics. They don't want to separate, they don't want to divorce, because they find it a failure on their end to be, having a broken marriage and a broken family at that. So there are issues like this as well that involves the migrant community in the church, where a lot of migrant women at times would isolate themselves because they feel like, sometimes they would feel more comfortable interacting with other women who are also single mothers in migrant support organizations, because at least there's a shared, struggle, or shared maybe life experience as a single parent in Japan. Like, sometimes there's some kind of welcoming space or welcoming attitude in migrant support organizations than in the migrant community. So yeah, I was going to ask you about this, maybe sharing a little bit of your fieldwork experiences a bit more. Like, what were the difficulties, or maybe as well as maybe opportunities, something that, I think you mentioned a while ago about why or how some of the experiences you learn from your interviews are quite contradictory to how media depicts, these women who venture international marriages. So there are a lot of discoveries while doing field work. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Okay. So, well, first thing about divorces, since you started from divorces, one of the issues that I had there, and it was very actually interesting when I started looking at the data, and you look at the couple and they seem to be happily married, and then another moment you talk to the woman and they say, well, we are divorcing, or I'm trying to divorce, or I'm thinking of divorcing. There were couples where women continuously claiming that they were in the process of divorce, but it never happened. And they wanted to divorce, but they kind of were like still there, still around, and not really divorcing. But a lot of couples, when they divorced, and from outside, they looked again happily. And then when you trace, and that was one of the things about this research being continuous, because I could follow their lives. I could see at which point they started like breaking down, or if they continued. I think about 50% of the couples among my participants got divorced. And yes, so another interesting finding was that some Filipino women were married in the Philippines still, and there was an issue of bigamy actually, and we described these cases. And compared to Filipino women, and yes, Filipino women were more kind of like more into holding marriage together. But among Russian-speaking women, there were different attitudes. Some women were saying, well, no matter what, I will live in this marriage. And I have a lot of cases where women are still married. They have their issues, but they still prefer to be living with their husbands, and they still like to be in this marriage. There were women who were more pragmatic. They were like, okay, if something happens, I have to be ready. And so some of them would just give birth to one child and just stop there. And some women were like, okay, if it happens, I have to have my safety net and everything. And a lot of the data, a lot of my participants that I met on the Russian-speaking women's website. It used to be a forum, now it moved to Facebook completely. But before, and so it became a very good source of information for many women, first of all, because this idea of being divorced without actually knowing that they were divorced. And once in a while, there will be a woman asking, wait, how do you call that paper? I need to go to the city hall and sign it so they do not divorce me without me knowing about that. And so because women were aware of this, and some men would threaten them, they already knew procedures, where to go and what to do and how to go about that. And one more issue was that some women, of course, they were quite secretive about issues in their families, and gaining trust is one of the hardest points in our research, especially when they need to open up. And I noticed a lot because I interviewed Japanese men as well. And for Japanese men, it was very different. I remember I interviewed wife, and wife is totally set on divorce. She is not happy about their marriage. She is she's not into this marriage anymore. She is getting ready and preparing herself. And when I talked to the husband, and that's where this idea of uchi and soto was very important, because for him, everything is working out and he doesn't see any problems in their marriage. So it was actually very interesting how even inside they didn't really communicate it well. But yeah, I saw a lot of those situations. And also many women actually came to me, and they would talk to me and ask me, well, so you specialize in this, what do I do here? Or what do others do? And one of the funny examples was when I asked one woman why she thinks her husband chose her, like why he got married with her. And she was like, well, that's what I want you to ask him and tell me. And that was very kind of funny episode. And when I asked the husband, He said, oh, well, we're kind of 50-50. Like Russians are like not that traditional, as traditional as Japanese women, but they're not as emancipated as Western women. So they have this tradition and emancipation balance. And when I told this to her, she said, well, why didn't he just say that he loves me? And it was very interesting that she was expecting him to tell me that he loves her, and then I had to tell this to her. So it was kind of funny situation.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I also had similar experience when I was interviewing the mothers and their children. Like the mothers would ask me, like, please ask my kid about, whether he or she loves me more than his or her father, like something like that. I mean, you can just talk because we belong in the same house anyway. Why do you have to use me? It's like sometimes researchers get caught up, in these, intimate, maybe issues or topics, that family members are a bit scared or intimidated to discuss. And sometimes our research also becomes a platform through which such intimate concerns are being talked about. So it's just like getting into this intimate sphere, where our job is to illuminate these issues, have a more critical lens on these issues. And speaking of intimate, I think I'd like to ask you this question from my advisor, Professor James Farrer. So he wrote related to the theme, probably this is theme of intimate politics. Intercultural marriages are sometimes seen as a space for renegotiating gender roles by challenging patterns of patriarchal marriage, which is very much a description of I think marriage overall in the context of Japan, right? But they also could be a place for reinforcing traditional patterns and gender hierarchies. Do you see new gender norms emerging in these relationships? I'm interested to know this as well. Or do you see the reinforcement of patriarchal marital forms? Are there differences for different groups in your research, like those between Russian women and also Filipino women married to Japanese?
Well, again, we have to look back at the Russian women's growing up, and well, Russian state was like kind of organized in a way that women are equal to men, while they were not equal to men. And another issue was that there was a lack of men, and so they have to be active. And those women who are like coming to Japan, they're in many cases they are very active. They're taking active life position, and one thing, but at the same time they expect men to take lead in their life. And here there were a lot of I see, and they want to lead in the marriage, but at the same time they want to be led, and they expect the husband to lead, but when it doesn't go their way, they just go and divorce. And so that was one of the issues, because they were expecting and another issue was that many men expected women to and that's back to this cultural idea. They did not really see that the fact that she is a woman, she's from different country and from different culture, and not knowing about their culture, they assumed that they would act like Japanese women would do. And then Russian women, of course, they would be very different. And in this sense, there was a lot of expectations and miscommunication. And one of the, and it's not so much in the gender roles, but in the expectations, what they wanted from the other. And then when women were led, when they were told what to do and how to do it, many of them didn't like that. But and then those who were trying to lead in a very hard way, again, for Japanese men, it was an issue. One of the couples, maybe it's not really related to the question, like whether there are new patterns, but one of the things that I saw, and I always give this example to my students, it's these gendered patterns of talking, of communicating. And as you probably know, Japanese language is very gendered language. And Russian language is very straightforward and very kind of assertive. And so, and women learn Japanese language from men. And so there was this like mix of issues. And one of the women, her husband, was talking very rough Japanese language, and she learned a lot of it from him. And what I saw is that she would speak in the way that he speaks. And when they would talk, he would expect her to speak like his mother speaks. And his mother is very tame and like quiet Japanese lady. And she would just reply with Russian intonation, with all the road language that she learned from him. And the conflict would go on and on and on because he doesn't like how she expresses herself, and she doesn't understand what he wants from her. So she is like arguing and asserting herself. And so like I thought that it was very interesting how these gendered patterns and gendered expectations did not really match in these marriages.
Right. I believe I think I've also observed the same, no, in my research, the narratives that I collected from the Filipino single mothers, I've interviewed in Tokyo. There was really an obvious mismatch of expectations in marriage, and I think it didn't help also that the barrier. Now we need to unpack this barrier that separates the migrant women and their Japanese spouses. No, it's the intersection between language, culture, and legal barriers, because there are different legal structures in actually a lot of Filipino migrant women, and to my knowledge, based on my fieldwork, also very limited understanding of what they know is, there's no divorce in the Philippines, but the legal systems obviously do not function the same way in the Philippines and Japan. And all these legal challenges, haunt them from time to time, not just, in managing their marriage, but also in raising their children. So it's part of because you talked about marital citizenship, but it at times it overlaps as well with understanding and negotiating the citizenship of their children, that oftentimes acquire the citizenship of their fathers, and not necessarily that they become citizen of the migrant women's citizenship. And so the intersectionality of these barriers really complicate the international marriage and how it functions. It's supposed to function smoothly. I guess if there's any maybe sharp, demarcation between maybe Japanese marriages and international marriages, all this intersection of challenges really make it difficult for international marriages to survive, and before I read the next question, I would like to ask you about, if there are any, you mentioned you did not compare so much, right? The different cases, right? You only focus on the demographics and maybe the individual characteristics, right? But building on what I just said, maybe did you look into also the legal systems, like how marriage is whether it's registered mostly in the Russia in the government of the host country, because in the case of the Filipino women, a lot of them, as you said, ventured in marriage that's bigamous, because they haven't nullified or dissolved their marriage here in the Philippines, and they are married to a Japanese, and sometimes what even complicates this, because when they get divorced, sometimes even prior to divorce, they get into a relationship, a follow-up relationship, no, that's outside of marriage, and this is what makes it a lot more complicated. um that's why maybe sometimes I would say, thank goodness I didn't do research on marriage, international marriage, because it's really complicated when once you interview a lot of these migrant women, and their lives are not just tied to marriage, but also to family life and kinship, by the way. Nobuo Suzuki mentioned the term tripartite desires. A lot of migrant women negotiate tripartite desires, the desire of the extended family, and that includes the in-laws from both sides. That again adds to the complication. So my first question is about the legal challenges, and then the second one is how the migrant women are able to, or whether they do negotiate or renegotiate, no, their relationships with extended families.
Okay, thank you. Well, as for legal procedures, one of the, we didn't discuss this in this book, but it's actually what I'm thinking now, and I'm looking into how I can organize this. Maybe you're familiar with Japanese law, citizenship law. There is this clause that if you receive second citizenship, you cannot, you lose your Japanese citizenship automatically. And that what was faced by many Russian women in particular, because it's a bit complicated here. You are not born into Russian citizenship, you have to acquire it. And so what was happening is that women thought in many situations that their children can have two citizenships, and they can decide on which they will have by the age of 18 in Russia. And what they didn't know is that they need special permission for this from the, I think, Ministry of Justice. And they were applying for citizenship. And in 2012, I think there were first cases where women were told, well, your child doesn't have Japanese citizenship anymore, and he lives, or he or she lives in Japan illegally. And they would lose it by the fact that they acquired Russian citizenship. And so this procedure, and many women actually found themselves in these situations when they had two passports for their children, and they didn't know how to deal with this. Some of them went to the immigration police, and immigration already knew this, but the earlier cases, they had to have really kind of harsh process of interrogation by the immigration police officials. And they were asking, like, why did you do this? You really didn't know about what kind of consequences you might face if you receive another citizenship. So that was the first issue. And but at the same time, some of the women would go to their local city halls, and they would say, well, we lost citizenship, what do we do now? But local governments were like, no, you have your citizenship. And so there is a bit of kind of difference in different areas. And so some of the women, they just sit there and wait till everything gets solved, because now Russia is actually, they're thinking about this new law for the children, because of this sort of situations, for the children to be born into citizenship, not acquired by application. That's one thing. But those who had to face this situation, they were applying for visa, first of all, to be the like kind of dependent of their parents, of their Japanese parent, and then later they would naturalize back into Japanese citizenship. So they had to go through this whole procedure. And that is one of the legal issues. Another legal issue was that how the state defines actually love, and how like one of the couples that had 25 years age difference. I remember when I interviewed husband, and he was like, well, we met in Russia, and when we applied for the visa for my wife, they were asking whether I'm planning to sell her, like whether I'm human trafficker. And he was like, well, we are in real marriage. So there were this sort of complications. And in case there are, and this bit we described in the book, when immigration officers have suspicion that the marriage is not real, like real marriage, they would be interrogating them separately and asking them different questions. So that was another point. And as for like relatives back home, it was interesting. In many cases, it was Filipino women who were talking about this, and Japanese women who were married to Western men, and who were actually expected to fulfill like this care duties toward their parents, or they wanted to live closer to their parents. And one of the couples, it was American woman and Japanese man. The Japanese man had to take over his parents' business. That's why they had to move back to Japan, so he can do this. In Russian women's cases, most of them never actually, when I even asked them whether they help their parents, it was interesting. They would just say, no, we just send them money once in a while as presents, but we do not have these material connections. So that was probably the difference between expectations of families in the Philippines and in Japan and in Russia.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Kim. Related to the legal opportunities and challenges, that affect also the identity of not just the migrant spouses, but also their children, born to these the international marriages. There's a question here from Stefan. What do you think are the main reasons for the differences in how Japanese and Western Japanese couples raise their children, like children born to Japanese marriages and those born to international marriages, no? Do you see the differences in that regard between couples with a female versus male Japanese spouse? I get to ask this question every once in a while. Like, what's the difference between, because we always have, I think because of the imbalance, right, in the number. There's a demographic imbalance. I think I can say for Filipino Japanese marriages, it's like 92 to the ratio is 92% to 8%. So this is why there's a lot more Filipino women married to Japanese men than the other gender Japanese women Filipino women marriages. So yeah, would you like to address that? Like, because there's like I said before, there's a reputation that international marriages are more likely to fail than Japanese marriages, like in terms of divorce rates. Did you discuss this in the book?
You mean raising children, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when it was about raising children, what we actually looked into is the geopolitical position of the foreign spouses country. And with Russians, the problem was that, well, Russian is a hard language to learn, first of all, and it's very hard to pick up Russian education on the way. So it should be either from the beginning Russian. And what was happening is that some women who actually went to this like Russian and Japanese education simultaneously with the long distance Russian education, many of them managed to go till the fourth grade of Russian school. It's the end of the elementary school in Russia. because from 5th grade, it becomes very hard, and like the language becomes very like advanced, and the program changes. This is middle school for Russia. And so if they wanted to pick it up, so they had to work really hard. That was first issue. Second issue was that what's the need of Russian education? So it's valuable.
Value, yeah.
You can, and many of them said, well, my child is half Japanese. This child is raised in Japan, and probably his or her future will be in Japan. So then what's the point of getting Russian education? And actually recently I saw on the among Russian speaking women this conversation where one woman said, well, I have 3 children and now I'm working on Russian language with my youngest one, and the oldest one was passing by and was like, well, so much efforts for nothing. And she was very upset that he understands the language, but he doesn't see the value of the Russian language. And of course, it was very different for Western couples, especially when husbands, like Western husbands or like Western wives, were very into like providing children with global skills, with being able to compete globally. And in that case, English, if they were like, and we had mostly English speaking, English native nationals there, and they would be talking about the importance of English language, and they would try to deliver it to the children. And so they will be very different dynamics. And so that's how it worked differently. And one more problem was that some couples did like spend 6 years in Japanese elementary school, and then they would go to the international school in Japan. And international school in Japan is extremely expensive business, and like it's $20,000 and more, and not so many couples can afford this. What I saw Russian women were doing, they would be like, okay, we go for 3 months for vacations when kids were small, back to Russia or back home, so they can talk to parents and get the language. And so it was frequent visits, and they would talk only in Russian inside house, and children would not really respond in Russian, they would respond in Japanese, but at least they will know the language and kind of can understand what is happening. But for Western couples, what they would do 6 years in elementary school in Japan, and then switching back, and but like with all catching up and everything. It's hard to catch up with Russian education, as I said, if you don't know like the whole basics, and it's very hard, and then there is no need. And so like that's why many couples went different ways about education.
Right. It's interesting. I wish I could talk more about this because I wrote something on this topic, like how the education orientation towards educational experiences or needs of children are shaped also by the future aspirations, that migrant women have for their children. And it affects also the migration experiences tied to educational experiences of Japanese Filipino children. That's one of the things I intend to work more on my own project. But at this point, maybe we'll go back to the issue related to international marriage. So there's a question here about the historical specificity, the coverage, the timeline of your discussion on international marriage. So somebody asked here about the concept of international marriage, which you in your book you referred to it to as far as the 16th century. I think the attendee would like to clarify your use of international marriage, because I think the understanding is that this is a modern phenomenon which dates as late as end of 19th century. And he would like to know what's the purpose of tracing it to as far as 16th century. So yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, we wanted to know whether they were international marriages and how they were positioned. And yes, you're correct. There was no this idea. The first mentionings and in one of the sources, I think they were saying that the first mentionings of international marriage, and I'm sorry, I have to now remind me when it was. It was a while ago when I wrote this.
Is it from historical documents or official documents?
It is based on the secondary sources of historical books on international marriage in Japan. And so the first mentioning of actually kokusaike kon was in 1867 in Japanese official documentation. Was inquiry by the British Council about whether there was a law prohibiting marriages between Japanese and foreigners.
Right.
But again, the fact that they were prohibited, or whether they were called kokusaike kon or international marriages, it's one thing. It's legal. But my question was like, were there and what was happening back then?
Yeah.
And actually, it was looking into this topic, like I found out about this system in Japan that was called yatoi mekake, that was used it's kind of not mistress. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact translation of this word, but it was ladies who would provide not only sexual services, but like all types of services. So this sort of kind of borderline wife and mistress role for men who were living, and at that point it was mostly Western men who lived in Japan, and they would have contracts with this man so the relationship was contractual, and women would receive sort of salary for this. And so but then why
I think karaoke, like karaoke song.
Karaoke was a bit later,
a bit late.
Karaoke.
Maybe because in the early 19th century, I think this is what the question is built upon, you know, because the Japanese prostitutes back in the day would develop some kind of would offer sexual services, but a lot of them fled Japan and moved to Southeast Asia. Actually, there's a very huge gap in research on this topic. So
on karaoke, karaoke were actually the karaoke, and then it was japayuki. Karaoke, they were the ones who were sent out, and japayuki those ones who were coming back and coming to Japan, and it was from 1970s.
Right. So but it's interesting, how you these maybe our more modern understanding of international marriage and how it occurs now may have taken a different form maybe back in the day, in the 16th century. As you said, there's a thin line that separates a wife and a mistress, and that's a kind of the maybe that kind of idea of a migrant spouse, is like that blurred role or category, social category that's not so well examined, in literature. Thank you for that. And there's a question here about international marriage, about the role of religion, whether that causes a major problem in international marriage couples, among international marriage couples. Because I can speak a bit more about the Filipino marriage, but I would allow you to shed light on this issue. Or maybe did they practice religion together? Is there something like that?
So, well, it's very interesting. Japanese are religious and not religious at the same time. They do not really exercise religion in the let's say Christian type of religion exercising, and so this is very different for them. So I saw many Russian women who were religious, whose husbands became Christians, and they would go to the church and attend. And Russian Orthodox Church is very strict in Japan. So to get baptized here, you have to attend lectures, and men actually have to go through this, and they're willing to go through this. And they are familiar, like we have Easter. Again, we do not celebrate Christmas in like in Russian, like it's kind of mix of Western Christmas that everybody is celebrating on 24th, 25th, right, of December. But then Russian Christmas is on 7th or 8th of January. And so then you go to the church, and then Easter. So probably are the most important celebrations. But I rarely saw problems based on the religious views. Only one woman mentioned that her husband's religious views actually were not really fitting her views, and that's why they divorced. But in other cases, it was mostly in Filipino women's cases when church was considered as a space where they can actually exercise Filipino culture, and they would bring kids, and kids would be engaged in all the on different ceremonies in the church, so they can know more. Yeah, so it was more in the Filipino women's case, because again, it's the difference between Russian Orthodox Church and Catholic Church. So that was because Orthodox Church does not really expect you to visit many times, so it's you go there and attend mass, but nobody is really socializing there.
Right. My colleague Alec Lemay wrote an article on this where he examined how the participation in religious activities, say in Catholic Church, of children of Filipino migrants is sort of a phase that they outgrow eventually. So there's a particular, stage in childhood where Filipino migrant women are able to bargain, for their power, their control over the lives of their children. But at some point, these children also are able to like counter there's sort of a power struggle between them and their mother. So eventually, a lot of these Japanese Filipino children in his study would use bukatsu as an excuse, as escape, from involvement, in church activities, because a lot of Filipino migrant women are tied to the Filipino migrant community through the church, the local church, Catholic church at times. So school becomes a space where the parent-child relationship becomes constrained, and it reinforces the difficulty of migrant women to negotiate for their role, in the life of their mixed heritage children. So and sometimes I think that also sort of reiterates the idea that there's a very strong assimilative pressure in Japanese society, through school, to local or community life, through workplace, workplace culture, and so at times a lot of migrants would lose their bargaining power in the process, so that they would have to give way and become assimilated in order to maybe manage quote unquote healthy family life, and even marriage, right? So speaking of that, healthy relationship, or maybe social health, of Japanese. There's a question here about issues such as the parasite single phenomenon in Japan, and I guess to some extent hikikomori as well, right? A lot of young Japanese who would socially withdraw, and would seek for intimacy in the virtual spaces, and maybe even go to maybe entertainment, districts, for I guess for leisure and for relaxation and
Mhm.
just like before, no, except that now I guess the industry is accommodating those who are socially withdrawn, no. Before it accommodates more of the stressed salarymen, right? So
Mhm.
you know, the I guess the clientele has also sort of shifted in the more recent years. Now, related to international marriage, do you see international marriage as a so-called solution, no, to these societal issues affecting Japan? And I guess in to some extent the aging phenomenon too, no, because it's
Mhm.
becoming more and more difficult for a lot of aging Japanese and divorcee at times, you know,
Mhm.
to find partnership and I guess revitalize, you know, intimacy, especially when they have, you know, become divorced for some
Mhm.
time. So yeah, do you see some patterns or some sort of connection
Mhm.
to these social issues and, you know, and then the increasing
Mhm.
number of international marriages in the recent times?
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
more recent, right? Parasite singlehood, you have hikikomori, no,
Mhm.
and then well, aging has long been there since 1970s, no.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, as for parasite, before I go to the parasite singles,
Hmm.
um, demographic issues in Japan.
Yeah.
And one thing that we noticed was that couples that had Japanese husband, foreign wife couples actually operated in the similar logic to Japanese families in terms of birth rates. And usually there would be 1, 2 children. And there was very rare cases when there were 3 children. Like the cases were, there were cases, but it was mostly like, let's say, if husband had already children from previous marriages or wife had
Mm-mm.
children from previous marriage, and that would be her third child or like second, third child. But if both of the spouses, for both of the spouses, it was the first marriage, there will be 1 or 2 children. And uh, that means that they operate in the same, they are having same sort of influences on their marriage as regular Japanese couples because of the constraints of the education and like all this cram school system and
Right.
all this whole loop of education, meritocratic education that is required, and that is what couples aspire for. But when it was foreign husband and Japanese wife couples, there were more children. But again, in our case study, those many of those couples were the couples who had children in the international schools. Again, when it comes to education, the costs of education define how many children they would have. And as for parasite singles, well, I think this term is quite contested these days, and they're not. They said, well, they're not parasites because they want to be parasites, but because it's like structural and employment issues that constrain their life. And uh, we discussed, we talked about the idea of parasite singles in the idea of who is like who are the grooms of foreign wives. And so because the idea of this economic prosperity, Japan being developed economy equals to the economic prosperity of all its citizens is not really working.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of parasite singles came up. And that Japanese women equally to foreign women want to get married to somebody who has very good social standing. And again, in particularly in Japan, um, uh, it's kind of like the I guess spouses' social standing is very important, right?
Mm.
And that's where the issue of there are groups of men who are very popular and who are very marriageable, and those ones who are less marriageable but still want to get married. And that's where this idea of paradoxical hypergamy came out, that women from foreign countries, they might be middle class educated women, but they just from less developed countries, but they get married with less marriageable men in the receiving countries. So in our case, it was Japan. Again, that was not really supported by my case studies, because a lot of men who were in my participants like cases, they were like either previously married or they were educated, like having good jobs, but again, it was related to the industry where they met. If it was in the women's home countries, so men went there for a reason and usually worked for companies or for embassies, or it was those salarymen who would go to the hostess clubs. And so that's why it kind of was not really supported that women are actually getting married with men who are lower in the social position. So,
yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. And as much as I want to extend our conversation on this topic, I think we will never run out of, questions and issues to talk about. As much as I want to maybe go beyond our time, we have to manage this very well. I'm sure some of our audience participants have also other commitments. So I'd like to thank you once again for allowing the Asian Center to host the launching of your book. And to formally close our program, I'd like to call on the Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs, Dr. Tina Clemente.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. And I join everyone in congratulating Dr. Viktoriya Kim, Nelia Balgoa, and Beverly Ann Yamamoto for the publication of the book, The Politics of International Marriage in Japan. Our speakers already said everything about the subject, and I was listening intently. And I'm just joining you here as a mere ending punctuation in this fruitful program, so I will be brief. I hope today we have gained a better understanding of international marriage as a matter of wide interest from an interdisciplinary perspective, which is what the Asian Center promotes. The research brings out an intersection of various inquiries, and this is often missed when the subject is associated only with gender studies or a specific topic within migration studies. We've heard today that international marriage as a subject matter is a site for gaining a good grasp of political processes and socioeconomic dimensions in border crossing. I am very fascinated to think of border crossing in this context because it becomes all the more multifaceted as it exemplifies the dynamic at play among state policy, cultural and ethnic boundaries, and expectations of gender roles. In other words, there's so many complex demarcations that are being negotiated or contested in international marriages. Finally, the research brings together another kind of marriage, broad examinations on one hand, and particular realities on the ground on the other. I was fascinated about the narratives, so I like that very much. Aspects that academics strive to have in the research to make it meaningful. Indeed, we had a glimpse of thoughtful scholarship. And on that note, I end. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, Professor Clemente, for that very sweet closing remarks. And I'm sure a lot of the attendees today are looking forward to getting a copy of the book so they can, really see for themselves, all of these insightful, findings and the very concrete contributions of this piece of scholarship. So with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Kim to kindly flash on the screen because everyone's looking forward to getting the information on the discount.
Yes.
Code. Yes.
just 1 second, I'll probably put it. If you
Yes.
are in the
And-
US,
Yeah, go.
and you will need to buy it from again from the Rutgers University Press. So for the US orders, the code is so this is US and Canada. Just 1 second. I should have prepared separate slide. Okay, this is Canada. And then other countries.
So that includes the Philippines, right? And Japan?
Yes, yes.
Okay, while you're busy typing, I'd like to, maximize the time.
Yep.
I'd like to invite everyone to register and attend the upcoming Japanese Studies Association and Southeast Asia Conference, where the Asian Center is also one of the co-organizers. That is happening on December 15, 16, and 17 this month. And also, just flashed on the screen, there is a webinar on political demography of South Korea, generational conflicts, gender politics, regionalism, anti-Americanism, and netizens, featuring Professor Uy Hang Kenshin of Seoul National University. So if you're available on December 8th, kindly join us and register. I think there's already the sign up link below the publicity material. So we look forward to being with you once again in the upcoming events, activities of the Asian Center. We just celebrated our 66th anniversary last month. And yeah, we hope to have more in store for you guys in the coming weeks before the year ends. So just check out our official website of the Asian Center, UP Diliman. Yes, follow us and subscribe. There's an Asian Center Facebook page as well. There's at UP Asian Center, our Twitter account. We also have an Instagram account at UP Asian Center. And then there's a YouTube channel. If your friends or colleagues miss this webinar in particular, they can still view this by checking out the Asian Center UP Diliman YouTube channel. So we will be there with you in that recording. Okay, so I guess all the information are posted. Okay, so I need to jot this down because in case I have friends who would like to purchase the book. But thank you.